Welcome, my AppSec brothers and sisters. This video is another in a continuing series bringing tips and tricks to create and sustain a highly successful application security program. Today I'll be bringing you an overview of how to build deep developer engagement within your program. Now this series is vendor agnostic, focusing on advice that can be used regardless of your tools. My name is Chris Miller, and I've been in the IT game for quite some time. I have a passion for paying forward the things I've learned in my career, and I've created this channel to reach a much wider audience than I encounter during my day-to-day work. Our learning objectives for this video include why great development engagement is essential for the success of your AppSec program, why this is sometimes hard and what realities led us here, the goals and outcomes we are seeking from our developer engagement, and what are the characteristics of great developer engagement within your practice. Finally, what good looks like for each of these characteristics. Now, please note I will be producing several deep dive videos in addition to any of the details that you see on the topics you'll be learning about today. So why are deep developer engagement practices crucial to build a successful application security program? Well, first of all, without engaged developers, you'll see a continuous introduction of new flaws and vulnerabilities in your environment. This will come from both willfulness and negligence. Willfulness in that the developers will simply choose not to exercise good security hygiene in writing code, or negligence in that they literally may not know how to write the secure code. Without engagement, it is likely that developers and InfoSec will be at odds with conflicting goals. Really, your bottom line is that your AppSec program will not be successful without solid engagement from your development team. At best, your organization will be in a cycle of introducing new flaws, followed by fixing, followed by introduction of new flaws, and a never-ending carousel ride of wasted expense. Now hold on. What do I mean by conflict between developers and AppSec? Everyone is working in harmony toward common goals, right? Actually, it is very unlikely, and the vast majority of programs I've worked with do not initially have this harmony. But why is this the case? Well, to start with, AppSec and AppDev simply have different cultures. AppDev is all about building, providing new functionality, and creating to meet the needs of your organization. AppSec is all about providing controls to reduce risk. These two cultures have very different motivations, priorities, and goals related to the culture clash. AppDev is all about producing more faster, which will generally manifest in taking the path of least resistance to meet the demand for higher volume production. Being hyper-informed about both real and potential attacks, AppSec is driven to plug every potential attack point. Now, neither party is wrong, but they are naturally pulling in different directions. Now, here's where we're going to get real. I'm going to ask all of you to be open to some honest self-reflection of our professions, our colleagues, and ourselves. Many of us in IT have less than average social skills. We got into the profession because perhaps we were more comfortable working with things rather than working with people. Many of us are natural introverts, and in any case, our interpersonal skills are often somewhat lacking, which highly impacts the next several points. Because we aren't very outgoing with others, we tend to make little attempt to reach out to players and responsibilities on other teams. As the other side doesn't do much better, we have no relationship for the other side of the aisle. Without this relationship, it is very easy to dehumanize the other party. Due to this dehumanization, we often devalue the role and contribution of the other party. We likely don't fully understand the other role, and egocentrism drives us to see our role as superior, while the other role just doesn't get it. Developers will often express thoughts including, AppSec people don't even know how to code, what good are they? AppSec just has dumb rules that get in my way and it makes my work longer. They have no idea how to do our job, and they have to get out of the way so we can get things done. Whereas AppSec people will express that developers just don't care. They're too lazy to do the simple things that protect everyone. They continue to make the problems worse every day by introducing new flaws. And if they just did what we told them to do, all of our problems would be solved. Now, while these expressions may seem silly, I'm being deadly serious here. If you're honest with yourself, you've seen many manifestations like these over your career. It may be natural and understandable, but it will stop your program dead in its tracks if you can't correct for it. I will be presenting key techniques to overcome this division. But before we get into these specific techniques, let's take a moment to discuss our ultimate goals. We are striving to build a security-inclusive development culture, a culture that makes no distinction between functional quality and security quality. A culture where security quality is simply an expectation that is not separate or extra from the daily work. With this culture, our expected outcomes include halting the introduction of new security flaws, because you can't accomplish much if you don't stop the bleeding. A growing security debt will drive the probability of breach proportionately. Ultimately, all applications must meet and maintain the level of risk deemed acceptable by your organization and defined within your application security policy and application security program charter. So now that we know a little bit more about how we got here, let's talk about the characteristics of robust developer engagement within your AppSec program. So what does it take to build a great engagement environment? Well, first, you need to build an effective liaison between development and your information security teams. Next, you must provide on-demand experts to your developers to aid in remediation. You must train your developers in secure coding techniques to help build the core competency. Provide the maximum possible work in core developer tools through processes and integration, but also provide training to your developers to use the secure coding tools and platforms. Lastly, try to build low-friction processes that minimize disruption and maximize efficiency. Now, by applying all of these factors, you can start to achieve a security-inclusive development culture. So let's take a little bit of time to examine each of these characteristics a bit more closely. So what are some techniques that you can use to build a better liaison between your developer and InfoSec teams? Well, first of all, you need to establish routine contact between the development teams and leaders and the InfoSec team and leaders. This should be both formal and informal and will help to promote understanding and goodwill. Well, what are some things you can do to make this happen? You can certainly rotate team members from one team to the other team's staff or status meetings. The intent would be mostly to listen, but small guest speaker opportunities should not be ignored. Hold formal joint activities between the teams, planning activities, workshops, really anything that impacts both of the teams would be legitimate. Hold informal cross-functional activities, maybe lunches, after-hour work happy hours. Do it virtually if your team is spread out, but this can really help to humanize your opposite numbers in a more social setting. Provide anonymous feedback loops, and then keep to the obligation to answer in good faith to the larger group. Create a buddy system, pairing players together. At first, you might need to make some contrived activities to force the interaction, but soon these interactions will come much more naturally. Use routine formal liaison meetings between the team's leaders. This will provide an opportunity to offer unbuttered feedback between the teams. Now, you don't have to do all of these things. Pick what fits in your organizational culture. Start with one and then expand. All of these activities will help to demystify the opposite role and promote understanding and empathy with the particular players. Next, leaders must be good reinforcing sponsors. Now, I've provided a quick introduction to sponsorship in the H1 Powerful Program Foundations overview video, and we'll be producing some deep dives on this. But in brief, effective program sponsorship includes the concept that all leaders of all stakeholders in the program are in fact reinforcing sponsors for the program. Sponsorship is a formal concept including the obligation to express enthusiasm and expectations for the program, model the behavior you expect from your team members, and reinforce the behavior that you expect from your team members. In the context of building an effective liaison between AppSec and AppDev, leaders in both camps must express the full support for the goals and outcomes of the program, and especially for the goals of the other team within that program. They must model their sponsorship by providing priority and resourcing to the tasks and goals being asked by the program. And lastly, they need to be reinforcing the expected behavior and outcomes via formal and informal performance management techniques. Another characteristic of great developer engagement is that the security champion is part of the program decision-making process. Now, similar to the last topic, I've published a separate deep dive video on champions, but in brief, champions are individually contributing developers with an interest in AppSec. Now, the champion is a formal role in an AppSec program to represent and participate in as many tasks as possible and to provide bidirectional advocacy. Now, ideally, we're building this single champion into a self-sustaining network of champions with broad influence across teams. Please see my separate video about champions, which will go into much greater detail. By building formal and informal liaison opportunities, leaders exercising good sponsorship, and building out a strong champion network, you will significantly impact developers feeling supported and empowered rather than obligated by information security. Information security should always be an enabler, and it's not just a matter of how they're seen, they actually have to tangibly prove that enablement. Now, we've talked about a lot of techniques to improve the relationship between information security and application development. What are some other components that we need to do to help support your developer teams? The next pillar is to provide on-demand secure coding experts for your developer community. Now, it's impossible to have your entire developer population 100% expert in secure coding at all times. Natural skill variation combined with attrition will inevitably result in many instances where a particular developer doesn't know how to securely solve a problem. Providing expertise on demand will greatly accelerate your overall delivery. Now, this expertise could be internal or external to your organization. It really depends on your current level of maturity and capability. By providing the specialization, you spread a scarce resource over your entire development population. Providing expert secure coding resources will accelerate flaw resolution and ultimately the delivery of new applications and features. It will promote a culture of enablement within your development organization, and every encounter will provide a backdoor individual learning experience, further teaching the general developer population to fish. This expert resource will ultimately make the entire development team much, much stronger. But because these expert resources will always be scarce, it is critical to improve the secure coding capabilities of the entire development organization. Consequently, a best practice program will include providing training for secure coding techniques to the entire developer population. Some best practice characteristics within this training include accommodating different learning styles. Wow, this sounds like another deep dive is needed, as we could spend a lot of time talking about learning styles. But in brief, people learn via different methods, including kinesthetic, which is learning by doing, interpersonal, learning by relating, for example, study groups or perhaps one-on-one training, linguistic, primarily learning by reading, auditory, this might be via a class or listening to recordings, and visually, perhaps via a CBT or watching a lecture like the one you're watching right now. There are some other vectors, and most people actually need a combination of styles to get the most out of the material. But the point is that providing only one method won't serve your population sufficiently. Keep this in mind as you build out your training curriculum. Shout out to dear friend and colleague Lori Kratchmer for teaching this and other elements of adult learning to me many years ago. In addition to serving different learning styles, your secure code training must encompass all environments and programming languages currently used within your organization. Now, this may seem self-evident, but it isn't unusual for any particular training resource to have too narrow a scope of languages, and consequently, you may need to make a fresh survey of languages in use to determine what your training needs will be. I would dissuade you from making this type of training mandatory. Mandatory training tends to get just enough effort to complete rather than being an investment in learning by the developer. The result is very low knowledge retention and often can be a complete waste of time. Instead, leverage gamification techniques to encourage progress and real learning. More about gamification techniques in a future video. Now, you'll want to reward training progress with your performance appraisal activities. Try to align meaningful rewards that are commensurate with the effort that's expended and the value of the accomplishment to the organization. At the end of the day, development leadership must own the training for developers. But the AppSec program can perhaps enable the effort by identifying training or even funding it. And then remember that even without any budget, you can still provide some training from free sources such as OWASP or SafeCode. Now, get to a little bit stickier topic, and what do we do about outsourced developers? Now, this is an organizational choice, but most organizations aren't going to want to fund training for somebody else's developers, and I'm certainly in that camp. I would assert that your best practice is to ensure that security quality from outsourced developers is built into specifications which reside within your contracts and master services agreements. This will be covered in some detail in a future video on holistic programmatic health. A key element to making and keeping developers happy is working within the tools that they already use. Consequently, best practice is to minimize work in any new AppSec tools by leveraging integration into the core tools that are already deployed. Some of these tools may include integrated development environments or IDEs, where static scanning can be executed right when your developers are coding. Code repositories, where scanning can occur as code is checked in or checked out. Now, depending on your organizational practices, sometimes developers will configure builds in CI/CD tools or other orchestration, which is another place where scanning can be initiated. Lastly, ticketing systems are a common tool where results from the scanning may be posted. Now, other integrations are possible, but these are the most common. Do not overlook this preference for your developers because leveraging familiar tools will increase satisfaction and consequently lower resistance. Learn more about integrations and automation in future videos. Developers will have training needs for some of these integrations, and perhaps they will need to use the associated AppSec platform for some functionality. Certainly, development leaders will have some need to access analytics. So let's talk about training needs for the tooling. As with the secure coding training, your training on tools needs to meet the needs of all different learning styles. Unlike secure coding training, best practice would be to make this tool training mandatory. Why the difference? Well, frankly, it removes excuses. If you're mandating the scanning and consequently mandating training, no individual can argue that they didn't know or weren't enabled. You'll need to offer repeats on a quarterly basis or whatever cadence makes sense to account for new hires. As with the secure code training, development leadership must own the training with perhaps an assist from the AppSec program. Compliance to complete the training must be built into performance management for the developers and their leaders at all levels. All right, once again, what about outsourced developers? Well, in this case, you will need to train them as you expect them to use the tooling. This is just part of the necessary overhead for the function. The last best practice for this video is to create low friction processes. That is, low friction in your developer's perspective. First of all, reduce complexity wherever possible. I always used to joke about consultants getting paid by the box, but you'll want to use the KISS approach. Keep it simple, stupid. Provide maximum self-service opportunities. Some of this might include onboarding people or applications into the scanning workflow. Always back this self-service up with assistance to cover all probabilities. Where possible, allow the maximum level of self-ownership of processes by the development teams. Partner with them, help them get there. But at the end of the day, you care about the outcomes, not the minutiae of how. Provided that, of course, the workflows have integrity that is necessary to ensure the integrity of the program. And one contrary note about your exception process. You want your exception process to actually take more time to submit and approve than it would take to fix the problem, which maybe would only be 15 or 30 minutes. If you make the exception process too easy, it is the path that will be chosen rather than actually reducing risk to your organization. In today's video, we've talked about effective best practices to support the developers in your AppSec program. These include an effective liaise between development teams and your InfoSec team, providing on-demand experts to the developer population to assist with remediation, building developer competence in secure coding techniques, and maximizing the possible work in core developer tools. Where we do have new tools involved, we want to train your developers in these new tools and platforms that are being introduced. Lastly, we need to build low-friction processes that provide the maximum efficiency to the developers wherever possible. Achieving a security-inclusive development culture isn't magic. However, if you apply the best practices in this video, you might be surprised how fast you start to see some changes. Remember, your ultimate goals are to stop introducing new flaws into your application layer, and certainly to meet your organization's compliance goals, which are aligned to its defined risk tolerance. I hope you found today's materials useful. Please like and subscribe to the channel to ensure that you don't miss out on new content, diving into greater detail on these and other topics. Have a great day and keep the bad guys away.